Hi everybody, this is Mike Pach coming to you from beautiful Colorado Springs, where we have access to some great dark sky areas, where it's also pretty windy today, so you may hear the wind howling in this recording. I am the owner of Three Peaks Photography, and I have been enjoying doing night sky photography workshops for several years now. Today what I'm going to do is show you how to blend tracked sky images using a tracker like the Move, Shoot, Move rotator in my case, with non-tracked images. So let's get started. First, I'm going to tell you that I am a Bridge Camera Raw Photoshop user. So if you use Lightroom, just adjust this workflow accordingly. Right here I'm in Bridge. I'm inside the folder that contains the photos from the last workshop I did in West Cliff, Colorado, which happens to be Colorado's first dark sky community and the world's highest in elevation. So these are the two photos that I am going to work with. And normally from here, from Bridge, I would take the images into Camera Raw and do my adjustments, do my editing there. But I'm not going to do that now. We're going to do that later after we have our blend made, and we're going to use the Camera Raw filter inside of Photoshop. So one of the things that I like about Bridge is the feature that allows you to take files and put them into Photoshop. So I'm going to go to the Tools menu, down to Photoshop, and then select Load Files into Photoshop Layers. So this is going to bring me into Photoshop, and both of those photos are going to appear in separate layers in my file, and both layers are unlocked, so I don't have to go through that further step of unlocking the layers. So let's take a closer look at these two photos. The first one was a straight-on shot of this barn. This is one of the locations that we use for my workshops. And if you use a super wide-angle lens, like for me, I'm using my Tamron 15-30, you can get some pretty nasty distortions on buildings. So I wanted a nice straight-on shot of the barn so I wouldn't have to do any distortion correction later. So I pointed the camera straight on, got this shot. It's I believe it's a 20-second exposure, and it was just for the purposes of doing this experiment and seeing how well the sky replacement functions would work in Photoshop. So the bad part about that night was that the clouds didn't cooperate with this. Otherwise, there would be a nice Milky Way core behind the barn here for us to look at. So let's take a look at the other photo that's on the bottom of our stack. So here I intentionally tipped the camera up in order to get more sky and of course more stars. So this is a 2-minute exposure with my Move, Shoot, Move rotator, and you can see it did a really good job of eliminating any movement in my stars, which also allowed me to reduce my ISO, thus reducing the noise. But you also see that the barn is a little bit fuzzy because the rotator is moving, and that's what happens with your foreground objects when you do tracked images. So we want to take the sky from this image and then put it into the file that's on the top of our layer stack here. So we want to replace this sky with the sky from the image that's in the layer below this. So normally you would take a photo or a series of photos with your camera in the same position. So you would take your foreground photo with your tracker off, then you would take your sky photo or photos with the tracker on, and the camera would be relatively in the same position. So because I intentionally moved my camera up for the sky photo, I have to do a couple of extra steps here in order to include all of that extra sky that I captured. So the tool in Photoshop for replacing the sky won't pick up on that unless I do the steps I'm about to do now. So the first thing I'm going to do is zoom out a little bit. Controller Command minus zooms me out. Then I'm going to go to my crop tool, which is the keyboard shortcut C, and make sure that my parameters and my options bar are cleared out. If there's numbers in here, just click the button that says clear. Then I'm going to increase my canvas size on the top of this image, and just want to make sure that I have enough to include that extra sky in the other photo. So then I'm going to hit the enter key to accept that crop. Now what I'm going to do is take the opacity of this layer. You see that the top layer is highlighted. I'm going to go over to the opacity slider and bring it down to about 50% so that I can see what's happening in the layer below, and I want to try to line up the barns as best as I can. Now I'm going to click on the bottom layer to highlight it, make it active. The V key changes to the move tool. Now I'm going to move that picture underneath just below that edge of the roof. Since the pictures don't align, this is how I'm going to have to do things, and you can see how much extra sky I'm adding at the top. So I'm just going to go just below the roof line there, and that also helps me with my horizon, so I won't have any stuff bleeding in from this bottom picture with my horizon. So this is going to tell me how I need to adjust my crop. So now I'm going to go back to the top file, the top layer, and I'm going to bring my opacity back to 100%. Now you have a clear distinction of how much sky I'm adding. I'm going to go back to the crop tool, hit C for crop, and readjust my crop. So I'm going to bring this down to the top of the photo on the bottom of our layer stack. Once I get there, hit the enter key again to accept my crop. Now I have to go ahead and fill in this sky that's in the picture on the top. I know this seems a little bit convoluted, but in this particular case, this is what I have to do. So if I just used the Photoshop Replace Sky tool right now, it would only replace what is seen as sky in this picture. It would not go beyond this edge and fill in the transparent background. So this is what I need to do. I'm going to take my marquee tool, M is the keyboard shortcut for marquee tool, and I'm going to draw a selection that includes that transparent background and a little bit of the sky at the top of the photo. From here, I'm going to hit Shift F5 to get to the fill dialog box. Make sure that content aware is selected, and then I'm going to click OK. This is going to sample the top of the sky and fill in that transparent area. This doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look good. It just has to look like sky, so Photoshop will recognize it. Controller Command D to deselect, get rid of my marching ants. Now I have a photo with a complete sky. From here, I'm going to go to the Edit menu, then down to Sky Replacement, about halfway down. And I already loaded the picture that I want to use to replace the sky, which happens to be the photo that is in the bottom of my layer stack here. I'll show you how to load other photos if you want. So when we open this, it's automatically going to select that photo because that's the last one that I used, and it's going to do its thing and replace my sky. If I want to choose a different photo, oh, there we go. So it replaced my sky. Let me show you this before we look a little closer at what happened. If I click on this little down arrow, this little caret, you can see the list of files that I have access to. Some of these are preloaded into Photoshop. If I want to add my own photos, like the one that's highlighted here, I just simply click the plus button and then search my folders for the files that I want, and then click open when I find them. When I get in here, I can create separate folders, and like so if I have Milky Way skies, I can create a folder that has only those types of photos in them. Down at the bottom, I need to choose my output. So I have the choice of a duplicate layer or new layers. I'm going to choose new layers, click OK, and now you see I have a Sky Replacement group folder that has these images and these layer masks. And let's take a look and see how it did. So I'm going to zoom in a bit, Control or Command plus, zooms in, and I got to tell you, this looks really good right off the bat. I don't really see any issues in the transition area from my foreground to my sky. So I'm going to zoom back out. Control or Command 0 gets you to fit on screen. And I'm going to take a look at the mask on this photo that was created. So if you're not familiar with masks, I'll give you a few things that will help you along. But if you're not familiar with masks, I do recommend that you help yourself learn how they work. So I am going to click on the mask to make it active, and you can see that it's got these white borders around it. That means the mask is active. If I want to view the mask full screen, the keyboard shortcut is Alt or Option click. Okay. And the way masks work, everything that is white is showing through. So in this case, my sky is showing through, which is really good. Anything that's black is not showing through. Anything that is not black or gray is also showing through, but at a not 100% opacity. Okay, so you can see that I have a little bit of an issue around the top of my barn, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my brush tool, which is B, keyboard shortcut is B, and then I'm going to make sure that my foreground color is black, and I'm going to use it to paint in black, and I'm just going to paint in this area that is gray. And just going to do a quick job here, and that looks pretty good. Just a little bit of a touch up, maybe get that little spot over here on the crown. Okay, and if I want to get back to normal view, Alt or Option key again and click on the mask. Now we're back at normal view. I gotta say, this looks pretty good, and we didn't have to do a whole lot of work. So using that tool, the Sky Replacement tool, I would say works pretty well. Now, I mentioned earlier that I didn't do any camera raw adjustments, so I'm going to do them now. So my next step is I'm going to click at the top of my layers panel and highlight the Sky Replacement group. I need to be at the top of the panel to do this next maneuver. So it's Control or Command, Alt or Option, Shift E, E is an Edward, and that is going to make a layer that's a blend of all the layers below it. So from here, I'm going to go to the filter menu, convert to smart filters. This allows me to use filters in a non-destructive way. So convert to smart filters. Now go back to the filter menu and choose camera raw filter. And look what happens. The camera raw interface comes up. I have all the tools that I have available in Camera Raw or the Lightroom Develop module. And I'm going to open the basic panel, start there. Usually I start by adding some dehaze. This is going to really help my sky, make it a bit darker and make those stars pop out. Leave it there at about 50. I like to also increase the contrast. This also helps to make my sky a little bit darker. Go about 25. Let's see what else I want to do, and add some clarity. This is going to make the barn pop a little bit. 15 looks good to me. And maybe a little bit of vibrance. Add a little bit of color there. Also, I'm going to do a little noise reduction. Just go to the detail panel. I can zoom in really close here and do, some fine work, but I have found that with my stuff, if I do about 15 points, that's usually good enough. If I was printing this, I would, of course, spend more time doing some noise reduction. And then I'm going to show you a little trick here. If I go to the color mixer and I want to maybe make that barn stand out a little bit, I know that the barn is mostly orange. And I know that because I was messing around with the sliders earlier. So if I take the luminance slider for orange and bring it to the right to pump it up, looky there, I have increased the brightness of my barn and made it pop out a little bit more. I usually don't say things like looky here, but I just got excited when I saw the barn. And when you're at a barn like this, it seems appropriate that someone would say looky here. Anyway, let's go back to the basics basics panel, see if there's anything else we need to do. And I say this is looking pretty good, so I'm going to click OK. It's going to bring me back into Photoshop, and you see now I have a smart filter with a mask, and that filter is Camera Raw. So if I want to re-edit this, if I decide at some other time, maybe I go out for lunch or something, and I come back and I say, this really doesn't look as good as it should, I can go ahead and reopen Camera Raw and do further edits if I need to. If I save this file as a Photoshop file, then all of these layers are going to remain intact, and I can rework them if I want to. Okay, so that's the process using the Sky Replacement. I'm also going to do the same process by using the Sky Selection tool and see how different that is, and if that works better than the Sky Replacement or not. Now we're going to take a look at the method utilizing the Select Sky feature. And instead of going all the way back to the beginning and repeating all those steps that I did before, what I did was just go back to the point where we had used the content aware fill to fill in the top of our sky. So what we want to do at this point is we want to go ahead and select the sky. So I'm going to go to the select menu and choose Select Sky. In a couple of moments, we will have a selection with marching ants of our sky. There we go. So let's take a look. It did a pretty good job around the horizon and around the edge of the roof. A little funkiness in our tree there, but there's also a couple of spots where there are bright lights on the horizon, and Photoshop thought that was part of the sky. So that's not a problem. We can fix that in a little while. Next, we're going to go to the select menu again and choose Select and Mask. There's also a keyboard shortcut, Alt-Control-R or Option-Command-R for the Macs. This takes us into the Select and Mask dialog box, and this is a great tool for refining your selections. And I could do some work on this tree here if I wanted to. but for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to do a couple of quick things. I'm going to turn on Smart Radius and then adjust it to 1 pixel. Then I'm going to choose our output. So we want, for this purpose, a new layer mask. I'm going to select that and hit OK. So now we have a mask associated with our layer, but it's flipped. We want to have the sky from the picture below in the bottom layer, and we want to use the barn in the picture on the top. So in order to invert the mask, we just use the keyboard shortcut Controller Command I, make sure that the mask is selected and active. So Control I, and that flips us around. So now you see that we have the barn here. And let's turn on the bottom layer to show that nice tracked sky that we got with the Move, Shoot, Move rotator. Well, this looks pretty good at first glance, but I want to take a closer look at the mask and see if we can fix those little problem areas that we had earlier. So if you remember, that keyboard shortcut was Alt and click on the mask to get it full screen, and you can see that just like the other one, we have some issues where there's some gray areas that really should be white, and we're going to fix that with our brush tool. So hit B for the brush tool, make sure our foreground color is white. If they're flipped to black and white, you just hit the X key to flip, and I'm gonna adjust my brush size here so I can paint in and get rid of those black and gray areas in my foreground. Just gonna fix these up real quick here. If I need to zoom in on the mask, I do that just like I do with any photograph, Control or Command plus and minus. And I'm going to do a little bit of work here on this tree. Hopefully that makes it a little bit better. If it's not, we can fix it because we're working with a mask. Remember, we're not erasing any pixels here. We're just making them visible or invisible. Okay, I'm going to call that close enough for right now. Alt or Option click on the mask again to bring us back to our picture, and that looks pretty good. The only issue I see right now is there's some funky stuff going on here with the utility pole because of the two different images and the shift there. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. Plus we're going to also do our camera raw adjustments. So let's do the camera raw adjustments first. I'm going to do that other trick here where I'm going to hit Control Alt Shift E or Command Option Shift E to make a merged layer of all of my layers. Then I'm going to convert that to a smart filter menu and convert for smart filters. Then I'm going to go back to the filter menu, choose the camera raw filter, make my camera raw adjustments. Let's see, a little bit of dehaze for my sky. I could separate the sky from the foreground if I want with the new tools in Camera Raw and Lightroom. But again, for the purposes of the video, I'm just going to do a quick adjustment here. And what else do I want to do? A little clarity. A little bit of noise reduction. And also that other trick where I made the barn a little bit brighter. Remember, we used the orange luminous slider. Make that pop out a little bit more. There we go. Click OK. I want to fix that problem with the utility pole. So the problem with using smart objects is that you can't use the spot healing brush directly onto a smart object. So what I need to do is create a new layer, and let's see, down here it's hidden by my control here, so I'm just gonna go to the layer menu and choose new layer. Okay, now I have a new blank layer that's above my merged layer, and if I go to the spot healing brush tool, I need to make sure that I have the box checked that says sample all layers, and I can zoom in on that spot with the utility pole, make my brush an appropriate size, and fix that guy right up. There we go. All right, so that looks pretty good, and I'll leave it up to you which method you like better. One may work better than the other for certain situations, but we now have a couple of really easy, good options for selecting our skies so that we can blend with our tracked images. So that's it for now. I want to invite you to come out to Colorado and join me on one of my night sky workshops. It would be great to see you out here. We've got some really great dark sky areas, and also want to invite you to check out the Move, Shoot, Move Rotator. They have a lot of great tutorials on the website, and I have had a lot of fun using mine, and I look forward to doing it more throughout the seasons that are coming up. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope that you learned a lot.